My family would take yearly vacations to the same hotel every summer. It would always be me, my wife, and my 2 little boys. The summer of 2017 was the creepiest vacation of all because of the horrifying encounter with a creepy family at the hotel. When we arrived at the hotel, after unpacking, the kids went to the water park, whereas my wife and I sat on the chairs around the pool. When the night was falling, I went to get the boys and get ready for dinner. After searching for some time, I was able to find Tom, the older of the 2. I asked him where David was. He told me that he saw David going to the other side of that park, along with a strange person. I searched for him for a while and finally saw him. He was in the back corner of the park, where a few chairs were set up, talking to a small boy who looked about his age. Sitting in the chairs next to him was a strange couple that seemed to be the boy's parents. I walked up and briefly introduced myself, but they didn't respond aside from giving me a slight smile. Then I held David with my hand and took him to the room. I was afraid about this situation. David told me something strange. He said that the strange couple had told me to come for dinner at their place. And from the way he was telling this, David seemed interested as well. We ignored this after that and went for dinner at a nearby place. When we got back, we got in the elevator and made our way up to our floor, but as the elevator doors opened, David's new friend and his mother were standing there as if they were waiting for the elevator to go down. As soon as we got out, the mother looked at me with a short smile and asked if David could join them for dinner tonight. I briefly looked at my wife, who seemed just as confused and concerned as I was, and then I looked back at the lady and denied it kindly. Her smile faded as she turned and walked down the opposite hallway. It was strange that they were creepily waiting for us by the elevator the whole time just to ask about dinner. When we got inside our room, we pulled David aside and strictly told him not to go near that family without one of us with him. He seemed a bit upset about it, but he agreed. Eventually, we all got ready for bed and turned out the lights. A few hours into the night, I was shaken awake. I jolted up, pretty on edge, and I saw Tom next to me, still shaking my arm. I asked him if he was okay, and Tom responded quietly, whispering to me that David was talking to someone at the door. I immediately jumped out of bed and turned the corner leading to the front door. From the short glimpse I got before yelling at him, I could tell he was in the process of figuring out how to unlock the door, and I could hear a faint voice on the other side. I sprinted towards him, screaming for him to back away from the door. David jumped back, frightened by the volume of my voice. I slammed against the door, hearing footsteps sprinting down the hall as I finished unlocking the door and swung it open. I know I should have just stayed in the room and called for help, but I was in such a rage that all I wanted was to confront that creep. As I stood outside the room, I saw someone peeking from behind the wall at the end of the hallway. I tried to catch up, but once I turned the corner, there was no one on the other side. After looking around for a few minutes, I ran back to our room and met my wife, who was already awake due to the chaos of the situation. I told her to lock the door as I was going to go to the front desk to inform them of the incident. By the time I got down to the lobby, my adrenaline was starting to fade out, and I was trying to calm myself down so I could explain what happened. There was a young woman at the counter that I talked to, and I could tell she had never dealt with a situation like this. She called a security guard over to talk to me, as well as her manager. As we discussed everything, I told them about the couple that was near my kid in the evening. They told us that nobody else was staying in the same building complex as we did that night. And for that specific night, besides our kids, there were no other people but us and staff on the floor. They had no security cameras in the hallway, but the entrance and exit camera didn't get any footage of that woman or couple or that kid coming near the elevator. I told them a description of the man and woman, but none of them knew anyone who fit that description. In my late 20s, I worked as a security guard at a large hotel in my town. I didn't want that job, but it paid me way better than most of the jobs nearby that I actually wanted. The only and most annoying part about this job was the scheduling of shifts and the staff that worked with me. But I took care of it nicely. At the time, the hotel was having trouble with lack of staff to cover shifts, so my schedule would be mornings, evenings, or overnights all randomly throughout the week. It made it really hard to even sleep sometimes, but again, I liked the money. Anyways, I was working a late evening shift this night and was at the front desk talking to two of my coworkers. My shift used to end at 12, and it was around 11 when I was just passing time with my colleague. In the middle of our conversation, the phone in front of me, on the desk, rang. It wasn't a usual time of phone ringing. We looked at each other, and I checked the number. It was from one of the rooms in the hotel. I picked the phone up and asked how I could help them. For a few seconds, no one spoke, and suddenly, a man started speaking, and the man said that he was really worried about something happening in one of the rooms. I asked him what he meant, and he frantically responded, telling me to come up quick because he was getting really nervous. I checked the room number on the phone, then told him I would send the security up as soon as possible. And by security, I was referring to myself. When I put the phone down, I quickly explained the strange nature of the call to my coworkers, then headed to the elevators and went to the mid-level floor where the caller's room was located. There was a really strange sense of absolute silence when I was walking down the hallway. I expected to hear whatever the caller was talking about, but there were no loud noises coming from anywhere on the floor. I thought that the caller would be standing by their door waiting for me or something like that, but the door was closed strangely. I stood by the door and knocked it loudly, announcing that it was us, the hotel security. But there was no movement or sounds coming from the room as a response. I waited there for a minute or two, but there was no answer. Then I walked down to the end of the hallway to find out anything unusual for myself. There was nothing again. Then I continued walking back to the door and knocked again. A few moments later, the door to the room behind me opened, and an older woman asked if I was security. I said yes, and asked if they knew anything about a strange noise or the caller from the room, to which they replied that they had heard loud noises traveling through the hallway a few minutes ago, but were unsure what it was. From their voice and facial expressions, they seemed really terrified. At this point, things only got worse, and I was already starting to get really nervous. I grabbed my walkie and radioed down to the front desk, asking them to call the room again and let me know if they answered. After a little bit, they replied that nobody answered. I stood there for a moment, trying to think of what to do before radioing back down to them. I told them to check who was staying in the room. After waiting for what felt like forever, they finally got back to me, saying that the room didn't get booked for about a month. Even more confused, I took out my security key card and opened the door since nobody was supposed to be there. The room looked dusty and unused, as far as I could tell. I searched every corner of that room, but didn't find anything. Then I walked over to the phone. I turned it over and got the serial number on it. Then I went back down to the lobby where my desk was and checked the security records for timestamps of calls that had been made from that room. Sure enough, there was a record of an active call having been made from this room to the front desk, the one that I had answered about 15 minutes ago. As I was looking at the records, the phone rang again. I stepped back out of fear and then picked the phone after it had been ringing for a while. I didn't speak, and after about 10 seconds, someone started breathing heavily on the phone, and then whoever it was started laughing like a maniac. I dropped the phone and reported the incident. Obviously, the hotel didn't record the calls or anything, so all I was able to confirm was that someone was in that vacant room without permission. This ended up becoming a bigger investigation over the coming days, as the next morning, one of the guests staying in a room on that floor was reported missing by a family member staying in a separate room. The security footage of all the entrances and exits were reviewed, and the missing person was last seen leaving the hotel alone a couple of hours prior to the call that I had received. It's still unclear if the two incidents were connected or not, but it's definitely a really strange situation. I don't know how the caller got access to that phone or who they were, but personally, I believe that the reason they called seemed to add up with someone getting forcefully kidnapped based on their brief description. The person behind the mystery call was never identified, and as of right now, the missing person still has not been found. This story takes place about 5 years ago, when I used to work at a hotel near where I live. It's sort of a smaller hotel, and I was able to get the job because my parents are good friends with the owners. What I did was pretty much work behind the front desk and help people check in and check out. Of course, I did some other things too, but that was my main job. When I first got the job, I was working overnights, which were generally pretty quiet, especially in the middle of the night, and I had some free time. I didn't really like working in the middle of the night, but I did like that it was usually really easy. There would rarely be people checking in or needing anything from me super late at night. One night, I was working. It was about 1 a.m. It was really quiet, and it had been for some time. I heard the front door to the hotel open and shut, and looked behind the front desk to see who was coming in. I saw a man walk in, and he was walking towards me at the front desk. When he arrived, I greeted him, and he told me he was interested in getting a room. I started saying what I always say to people checking in, and the man's phone started to ring. He suddenly put his hand up and apologized, but he had to take the call. He then walked past me towards the hallway where the rooms were and disappeared. I heard him talking on the phone as he seemingly walked down the hallway. I remained at my desk, waiting for the man to return, and didn't think too much of it. But several minutes went by, and he didn't come back. I also didn't hear anything more of the man. I didn't hear him talking or walking around nearby. I turned and looked at the monitors we had behind the front desk that I could watch. They basically had every hallway in the hotel under surveillance. I scanned around them, and I wasn't seeing the man at all. Then I noticed one of the cameras seemed to be out of order. On one of the floor-level hallways, the camera had gone completely black. I thought this was strange, especially since the man had gone down in that direction. I decided to leave my front desk and see what was going on down there. The place was completely silent, and I couldn't hear anything. I walked out and went around the corner to go down the hallway where the man had gone. It was a hallway where we had some vending machines and a couple of meeting rooms. As I looked down the long hallway, I didn't see anything at first, but as I slowly walked down, I heard some noise. I kept walking closer to it. Once I reached about halfway down the end of the hall, I noticed the door to the stairs and exit of the building open up. I froze where I was and watched two men dressed in all black with ski masks walk out and down the hall where the guest rooms were. One of the men looked over at me and immediately noticed me. The other guy did as well. I was halfway down the hallway and had nowhere to hide. All I could do was turn to go back to my front desk. When I did, I saw one of the men start to run after me. I sprinted back to the desk. The front desk was in a sort of enclosed area for our safety, and I knew if I could make it back there, I'd be a lot safer. Once I got back, I closed the door and locked it, then called the police. The man arrived and tried opening the door to the area that I was in. He then went towards the front of the desk. I ducked down under it, as far as I could to be out of sight, in case he had a weapon or something. I heard a few bangs on the window and then a few bangs on the door. After that, it was silent for a while. I waited there hoping that the police would arrive soon. Several minutes later, I stood back up and looked at the security cameras. There was one that was still all black, but now another one was as well. I looked around behind the desk and didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything either. Less than a minute later, the police arrived at the hotel and walked in the front door. I told them what was going on, and they ended up searching the entire building. Unfortunately, the men that had been there were gone. After looking at the security tapes and examining the hotel, it was determined that the guy who had walked into the hotel and received the phone call had walked down the hall and left out the exit of the stairwell, letting the masked men into the hotel and covering the camera with black tape in the process. I think all the men had planned the job to rob one of our guests at the hotel or something. Either way, it gives me the creeps to think about.